What's up guys, MichiganerE here today with a brand new commentary. In today's commentary, I've decided that I want to do a rant on Activision because of the shady things that they've done as a company, but without further ado, let's finally get into it. Now, many consider EA to be the absolute worst company in gaming, but I disagree. I actually think it's Activision. I believe the only reason that EA is considered a worse company is because the things that they do are far more publicized than the things that Activision does. Now don't get me wrong, both companies are pretty bad and they both do shady things all the time, but comparing them both, I think Activision is just maybe a little bit worse. And this is exactly what we're going to talk about in this video, so let's get on with it. Now this news is a little old, but I still feel it's good to bring up regardless. So if you remember, back in 2014 there was reports about Destiny having on-disc DLC. Now for those of you that don't know what on-disc DLC is, essentially it's content that's already within the game, you just can't access it until you've bought it, which means that, in a sense, the game is technically incomplete. So the reason I even brought this up to begin with is to use it as an example for the fact that I think Black Ops 3 actually has on-disc DLC. Now the reason I'm even making this assumption to begin with is because of how each map pack for the game is released. You see, each map pack in the game is released in the form of an update which is usually around 9 to 10 gigabytes worth of hard drive space. These updates are then obviously installed, which means that the map packs are now installed into the game, and the only way that you can access them is by buying them because they're locked behind a paywall. Hence the reason why I believe Black Ops 3 does in fact have on-disc DLC, just like Destiny. Now the reason that I believe that this is bad is because, in a way, you're basically selling people an incomplete product, and the only way you can access certain parts of the game is by buying those parts of the game. So in other words, the only way to actually get the full product is to spend more than $60. Meanwhile, on another note, say that you're someone who doesn't want to buy any DLC for Black Ops 3, unfortunately, even if you aren't going to buy any, you still have to download the updates that these DLCs come in, so regardless, you're still taking up storage that you could have used for a different game entirely. And yeah, these DLCs are optional and you have to buy them, but regardless, you're still downloading these patches, which takes up, once again, a lot of storage you could have used for a different game or DLC. And yes, you could argue that you can just uninstall Black Ops 3 from your system, but for some people, that can be a major hassle. And so that's why I think that on-disc DLC is bad. And I'm sure that just like EA, Activision also cuts content out of their games only to sell it as DLC down the road. But that's besides the point. Now, it's time to move on to... Now, in Activision's case, they started using microtransactions around 2013, with Black Ops 2 if I recall correctly. Now you see, back in 2013, microtransactions in AAA games really weren't that much of a thing. They were very rare back at the time, and really only being in mobile games, but obviously since then, they've gotten far worse than they used to be, and really the reason for that is because of us, the consumers. And I'll admit, I was one of the many that bought microtransactions back in the Black Ops 2 era. I'm bringing this up not because of microtransactions themselves, but because of what they eventually turned into in future Call of Duty games. First, microtransactions were really nothing more than cosmetic items, and at the time they really seemed kind of cool, but obviously they've worsened more and more, and it's gone to the point to where now it just feels like, in a sense, a lot of newer games are made to feel cheaper because of the fact that when you spend $60 on a game only to boot it up and see that there's microtransactions all over the screen for $4 to $5, it just makes games feel scummier and shadier, and as if publishers of those games are sticking their hands in our wallets always trying to steal our money, which is not what I want to feel when I play a game after purchasing it. I want to feel like I just bought a complete product that I can enjoy without any feelings of resentment, because microtransactions over time have gone from being meaningless weapon camos to pay-to-win weapons that you can purchase for $5 to $6 to now being... Ah yes, supply drops. Where do I even begin with these? Well, I guess I could start off with where exactly they started out in the Call of Duty franchise. You see, while RNG systems in gaming have already been a thing for a while now, they first became a thing with Call of Duty back in Advanced Warfare. Initially, the game's supply drops were cosmetic only and couldn't be purchased with real money, but this eventually changed over the course of the game's lifecycle. And so supply drops went from being cosmetic only and unpurchasable to then being purchasable, as well as having weapons such as the AK-47. These supply drops eventually returned within Call of Duty Black Ops 3. And similar to how Advanced Warfare started out, originally the supply drops in Black Ops 3 were cosmetic only as well as were unpurchasable. But eventually, similar to Advanced Warfare, the game's supply drops eventually became purchasable with real money as well as having melee weapons and guns. Over time, this has led to more and more Call of Duty fans being completely enraged about supply drops and wanting them to be gone, myself included. Now you see, what's interesting is that apparently Black Ops 3 wasn't going to have any sort of supply drop system. And this is all according to a 6-month-old Reddit post. And while there's no proof that this Reddit post is legit, it certainly sounds like it is, so let me sum it up real quick. So in a nutshell, what it's saying is that, for one, because of Ghost's low-level population, Sledgehammer had to think of a way to keep players invested within Advanced Warfare. Hence the reason that Sledgehammer introduces supply drops. Then in December of 2014, Activision contacts Sledgehammer through email, tells them to do something similar to CSGO. Hence the reason why players were eventually given the option to buy supply drops, and thus the rest is history. Number 2. By July of 2015, Black Ops 3 is just about done being developed, but then around this time, Treyarch's given a direct order by Activision to put some sort of microtransaction system into the game, this being the reason why Black Ops 3 has supply drops. Treyarch then negotiated with Activision to keep supply drops cosmetic only. While Activision did agree to these terms, the condition was that Black Ops 3 supply drops would have to make just as much money as Advanced Warfare's, but in the span of 1 month. So as a way to compensate for this, what some of the Treyarch dev team members did was create some melee weapons in the span of 2 weeks, which resulted in a lot of weapons having very inconsistent animations because the development for these weapons were rushed. So then these weapons were put into supply drops, and this got the attention of a lot of Call of Duty YouTubers, which resulted in them spending money on these supply drops, which would get a lot of Call of Duty fans to buy these supply drops as well. 3 weeks into Black Ops 3's life cycle, and supply drops have sold 5 times less than Advanced Warfare's. This then resulted in the cancellation of Treyarch's original plans for having weapons such as the MP40 included in map packs, and instead, all these weapons would only be available through supply drops. Number 3. All of the money made from supply drops all goes to Activision, with the exception of a few higher-ups at Treyarch. No one else there is getting any money from them. In fact, the person who fought against supply drops the most is David Vonderhaar. He's pretty much the face of Treyarch. And considering the backlash that he knew he'd receive from something that he has no control over, he decided to take a week-long break as well as was thinking of retiring. And that really just about sums it up. Yeah, there's another part of this post, but that's just about the future of what supply drops were going to be. Seeing as this was made about 6 months ago, this was obviously referring to what supply drops would be right now at this point in time, and unfortunately, these predictions all turned out to be just about completely true. And so that just about sums it up. And once again, it's really sad to see just how true this entire list turned out to be, as well as makes me dislike supply drops even more along with all RNG systems in gaming currently. Now you could argue that RNG systems add variety to the games that they're in, as well as helps those games live on longer. But these arguments can easily be countered. You see, while an RNG system's biggest pro can be its randomness, this can also be its biggest con. For example, say that you and a friend are playing a game that has an RNG system. The system has a weapon that you and your friend both want to obtain. But because of the randomness of the RNG system, there's no guarantee that you'll both get that weapon. And say that your friend obtains that weapon but you don't, that could be seen as something very unfair, especially if you're a high-level player and he's a low-level player. In fact, let's add some insult to injury. Let's say that you want to unlock that weapon by playing the game and getting through all the ranks. Or instead of that, you try to get it through the RNG system but without spending any money. Meanwhile, your friend does spend money and gets that weapon instantly. This makes it even more unfair. Now, I'm sure that some people will argue that you just need to have good enough luck because RNG systems, in a sense, are gambling simulators. And while I can understand that, regardless, that's still a very flawed argument. And the reason is because games aren't meant to be gambling simulators. They're meant to be designed as these entertaining experiences that are easy to get into, that possess a certain level of difficulty or challenge that you eventually overcome as you progress throughout the game. And RNG systems take away from the satisfaction of this, along with the game's skill gap. And the same could be said for microtransactions. And yes, while I do get that microtransactions and supply drops are optional, regardless, they're still there and they're going to be tempting for a lot of people because of that, especially if they have exclusive items that you can't earn through actually playing the game. And as this happens more and more, they're only going to get worse with time. And at that point, you might as well just stop playing the game completely and instead just gamble everything. And seeing as supply drops are most likely going to be in every single COD game moving forward, Activision should at least give players the option to earn supply drop items through actual gameplay. But considering how much money these things are making, I doubt that's going to happen. But hey, at least you have the option to actually get them with in-game currency, despite the fact that you have far less of a chance of getting anything good if you don't use actual money to buy them. And so that's why I think supply drops are bad. Also, on another note real quick, if it was up to me as to how microtransactions and supply drops worked, I'd make it so that they'd only be available in free-to-play games and only be cosmetic only. Because honestly, I find it pretty stupid how games like COD have these RNG systems in them for the simple fact that we already bought these games. Also, with how many impressionable kids play these games, this could possibly lead to a lot of lawsuits happening, but that's besides the point. Anyways, it's finally time to move on to... Now, pre-order bonuses along with pre-order culture is something that I've really changed my opinion on over the years. Over time, I've gone from pre-ordering collector's editions of games to only pre-ordering regular editions of games to just not pre-ordering in general, and that's exactly where I am right now, and there's a multitude of reasons as to why. Now, I see a lot of people saying that they like to pre-order because of the bonuses that they can get, whether it be posters or DLC maps, etc, etc. And while that's perfectly fine and understandable, personally for the last few years, I felt that pre-order culture was at its best up until around 2009 or 10. And the reason is because, up until that point, there really wasn't any sort of pre-order bonuses at all. The only reason that you pre-order a game was for the game itself. But nowadays, it seems like you have bonuses such as DLC maps, which will eventually be added into the game 5 months down the road for free, which kinda defeats the purpose of even pre-ordering the game for that map to begin with. In fact, this logic could easily apply to just about any pre-order bonus, whether it be customizable items for a character or weapons, the list goes on. In fact, in a lot of cases, even if you don't pre-order a game, you can still get that pre-order bonus regardless. Take Nuketown 2025 for instance. Even if you didn't pre-order Black Ops 2, there's still a pretty big chance that you would have gotten the map no matter what. Also, I just wanted to bring this up really quickly, but it's pretty dumb with how different retailers, you have different pre-order bonuses. For example, with a game like Halo, if you decide to pre-order at Target, you get one armor set, but if you decide to pre-order at GameStop, you get a completely different armor set. And that can be really dumb and inconvenient. Now, let's say that you're someone who doesn't pre-order for bonuses at all, and you just want to pre-order a game just for the game itself. Even then, there's no reason to. For one, it's pretty pointless to pre-order physical copies of games for the fact that retailers never run out of physical copies of games at all anymore. For example, back in 2014 when Destiny first launched, I went to go pick it up on launch day at GameStop, not pre-ordered, and I had no problem picking up a copy. There was an overabundance of copies for the game left over, and once again I had no problem picking up a copy of the game, and it was the most hyped game of the year. In fact, a similar situation happened with Infamous Second Son earlier on that year. You see, similar to Destiny, I was able to go pick up the game on launch. But unlike Destiny, I was able to go pick up the $60 limited edition of the game, not pre-ordered. And that's an edition of the game you're only supposed to be able to get pre-ordered. But because there's such an overabundance of that version of the game left over, I had no problem picking it up. And even if a retailer that you go to runs out of copies of a game on launch, regardless, you still have online retailers such as Amazon and eBay. And both retailers are always very successful in shipping games. Now, digital gaming wise, well, there's no purpose in pre-ordering games digitally. The reason is because digital copies of games never run out. It's impossible. And yes, digital games do take up more space than physical games, but not by that much, especially now, so it's not that big of a deal. And regardless, whether or not you buy games physically or digitally, at the end of the day, not pre-ordering a game and instead waiting to buy it after a few days to a week, it's not a big deal. Because really, in most cases, the only reason that someone would want to pick up a game on launch after pre-ordering it is because of hype. And see, the problem with hype is that it's not good. In fact, it's very bad, because hype makes you set your expectations for a new game so high to the point to where you're only setting yourself up for possible major disappointment. And see, that's not something you want to feel after buying a new game. In fact, setting your expectations so low to the point to where you have no faith in that game coming out only gives you the advantage of enjoying the game more than you thought you would. And by having a little patience and waiting for other opinions on the game, you're only giving yourself more of an idea as to what this game is before actually purchasing it. And yes, while it's always good to form your own opinion, it's also good to listen to other opinions as a way to help you form an idea for what you're purchasing. But this doesn't mean that your opinion should solely be based on the opinions of others. So in other words, just be cautious of what you buy. Speaking more of pre-ordering, did you know that now Black Ops 3 DLCs can be pre-ordered? Which is not only weird, but considering what I've already said about pre-ordering digital games, this also falls in line with that argument. Not only that, but if you actually decide to pre-order DLCs, you can get certain themes for your system, but only on PlayStation 4 considering these are all exclusive to Sony. And considering the fact that PlayStation also has timed exclusivity with DLC, this is a major insult to anyone on Xbox One or PC. But I've already beaten the topic of timed exclusive DLC to death, but if you do want to see my video on it, there's a link to it in the description below. Also, you know how Modern Warfare Remastered is exclusive to the Collector's Edition of Infinite Warfare? Well, guess what? If you decide to pre-order the Collector's Edition on PlayStation 4, you actually get the campaign of Modern Warfare Remastered 30 days before Infinite Warfare comes out. So in other words, not only is Modern Warfare Remastered an incomplete product that's being sold with only half of its multiplayer maps, but by pre-ordering Infinite Warfare Collector's Edition on PS4, you get the Modern Warfare Remastered campaign 30 days early, which is an incredibly scummy business tactic. Oh, and speaking of Collector's Editions, now, there may not be a lot I can say about Collector's Editions considering a lot of the points I said with pre-orders would easily apply to this part of the video as well, but regardless, there are still a few things that I can bring up. For instance, the fact that collector's editions are only getting worse and worse with time. It just seems like a lot of items in a lot of newer collector's editions are far less valuable than items in a lot of older collector's editions and have no use or any sort of value whatsoever. For example, getting a toy quad rotor with Black Ops 2's collector's edition that will eventually break after like a few days, spending around a few $100s on something like that just seems like a huge waste in my opinion. And even when a collector's edition doesn't come with something like a huge statue, regardless, it still feels like a huge waste of money. Especially when a company like Activision prices a collector's edition at $150, yet that collector's edition only includes something like a steelbook case, a season pass, maybe a few stickers, and maybe a code for a few in-game items that you won't care about after a few days of use. And unfortunately, you have a lot of people who are hyped into buying these not because they actually want them, but because they think that they need them, because, you know, it's popular too. And once again, a lot of items that people think that they need from these collector's editions, in reality, after a few days, they're not going to care about. Also, if you've noticed, a lot of items that are meant to be exclusive to collector's editions usually become available to buy or free to download after a few months. For example, remember the Nuketown Zombies map from Black Ops 2? You know that map that was supposed to be exclusive to the game's collector's edition? Well, after a few months, that eventually became available to buy for $5. So, instead of spending like $100 on the game's collector's edition, you could have spent only $65 to get the game and that map altogether. Not only that, but in most cases, if you decide to wait to buy all the items that are supposed to be in the collector's edition individually after they're all released, usually you can get all those items along with the game for a cheaper price than you would if you were to buy the collector's edition of that game. But if you are someone who likes collector's editions, which is something I can understand, then I'd recommend to wait to get that collector's edition after it goes on sale. For example, I was able to get Black Ops 3 Digital Deluxe Edition for $80 instead of $100. How, you're probably wondering? I waited for the Black Friday sale to happen. And so, because of this, I saved $20. And that can be a lot of money for a lot of people. Also, before you call me out as a hypocrite for buying the Black Ops 3 Collector's Edition, just know that the only reason that I did is because instead of spending $110 to $120 on the game and all the DLC, it seemed better to only spend $80. And the only reason that I did that is because I thought all the Black Ops 3 DLC would be good. But unfortunately, that isn't the case. But hey, we've all made mistakes and I've certainly learned from mine. Oh, and speaking of season passes, for the past few months now, I've seen season passes as a huge waste of money. Just take Call of Duty and Battlefield for instance. You have two different franchises with $50 season passes, yet neither season pass is actually worth its price. For one, the season passes of both games cost only $10 to $15 less than the prices of the DLCs in each game added up separately, which defeats the purpose of having season passes as a discount in the first place. For two, you're paying $50 for content that you haven't even played yet, and because of that, you don't know if that content is going to be good or bad. So in a sense, you're wasting money on content that you don't know that you're going to enjoy. Sure, it's great when content turns out to be good and you like it, but what if that content turns out to be bad and you dislike it? You just wasted $60. And seeing as you obviously can't predict the quality of content that you haven't played yet, you're taking a big risk in buying something that you don't know that you'll like. Sure, once again, there's the chance that it could turn out to be good, but there's always the chance of that content turning out to be bad. Not only that, but there's also times where the publisher of that season pass doesn't even tell you what you're going to get or isn't specific about it. Also, it's pretty cheap how in a lot of cases, a game season pass will get advertised before the game even comes out. In that case, why would you put down money for the game season pass when you haven't even played the game yet? That doesn't make any sense at all. And yes, I'm fully aware that the logic of you don't know what you're buying could easily apply to games as well, but you see, games are the main content while season passes are nothing more than just extra. And seeing as the main content is always more important, if it's bad, then what's the point of getting the extra? Also, on another note real quick that's having to do with how overpriced DLC and season passes are, I'd say it's always best to wait for something like the Game of the Year edition to come out because then you can get the base game along with all of its DLC for $60 at most. So if it's a game like Destiny where the base game is nothing more than a bare bones experience, while all the actual content is in the expansion packs, then waiting for the Game of the Year edition of that to come out, like with just about any game, is always the best thing to do because, once again, you get all of the content, at most for $60. And I feel that that's a far better deal than spending hundreds. Anyways, it's time to move on to... Now when it comes down to the franchises that Activision has killed, well, they've killed just about any franchise that isn't Call of Duty. Do I need to name any? I doubt it, but I'll name some notable ones. Those being Crash Bandicoot, Tony Hawk, Guitar Hero... The list goes on. And so far, I think that they're in the process of killing Call of Duty off as well, because Call of Duty in recent years has gone from being an actual mature franchise to now being, well, just take a quick look at this photo and you'll understand exactly what I mean. Now don't get me wrong, I thought Advanced Warfare was an alright game, and I feel that Black Ops 3 is decent, I like it. But looking at Call of Duty then and now, while it does still have to do with war, kind of, you can tell it's definitely far more kid-friendly than it used to be. From having a very serious and, I guess you could say, a realistic look with military-oriented camos and whatnot, to now having things like dabs and plenty of other types of dumb gestures and taunts along with Space Cat camos, and just about anything you can think of is now a part of Call of Duty. And because of this, I can't help but feel as if Call of Duty 1, 2, and 3 were more mature in a lot of ways. And all of those games were rated T. And now, in Infinite Warfare, from the looks of it, not only is multiplayer going to be affected by all the kids playing Call of Duty nowadays, but zombies is going to be as well. Because now zombies in Infinite Warfare is going to have, from the looks of it, things such as candy bar perks and possibly taunts and gestures similar to multiplayer. And now, once Call of Duty's dead, Destiny's most likely going to be next. But considering how Destiny 1 turned out, I think they're already on the road to doing that. And along with all the developers that they've killed, this being a fairly old picture, but I would say it's pretty relevant, and let's not forget what they did to Neversoft and Raven Software, and what'll most likely happen to Infinity Ward, Treyarch, and Sledgehammer Games as well, once Activision no longer has any use for them, of course, and the same will most likely happen to any future developers that they hire. I mean, just look at what happened to the old Infinity Ward. I mean, they're at Respawn Entertainment right now, currently working on Titanfall 2. I wonder why. So yeah, while EA does obviously get criticized for the many developers that they've killed, it seems like Activision gets ignored for committing the same actions. And you know what? That's pretty upsetting. But I suppose that there's nothing that we can do about it now. Anyways, it's finally time to move on to... Now at this point in time, it should be no surprise whatsoever that Activision obviously does not care about the PC community. The lack of dedicated servers and mod support, the fact that games like COD Ghosts were broken on launch, the fact that games like Call of Duty 1 and 2, as old as they are both still $20 on Steam each, and the overall lack of care for Call of Duty on the PC platform, it's just really upsetting considering the fact that Call of Duty at one point was a PC exclusive franchise, but it really shows just how much things can change in the span of about 13 years or so. And while this is all well known, this isn't actually what I wanted to talk about. You see, what I'm about to tell you is what inspired me to make this video. Now, this is a huge middle finger to anyone who plays Black Ops 3 on Steam. You see, from this point onwards, you cannot buy any of the Black Ops 3 map packs individually. You have to buy the Season Pass to get any access to any DLC in this game. So let's say that you're interested in only one DLC in the game, but you only want to buy that one DLC, and you're someone who plays Black Ops 3 on Steam. Well, too bad. You're going to have to buy the entire Season Pass just to get access to any one of these. Now, some people have actually defended this decision by saying that because of Black Ops 3's low player count on Steam, they're doing this to keep the small community together. Now, that is an incredibly flawed argument, and I'm going to tell you why. For one, the reason that the Call of Duty PC community is so small is because of Activision's doing. If they actually still had respect for the community, then it would be bigger. And two, if they were really doing this to keep the PC community together, then they'd make all the DLC free similar to how Halo 5 and Rainbow Six Siege do it. Now before you come out and defend Activision by saying that they're a company and they need to make money, yeah, obviously we all know that. But you see, there's a pretty big difference between a company needing to make money and being outright greedy. And this logic could be applied to anything at all that's been mentioned about them in this video. I mean, if a game like Halo 5 can have free DLC, then why can't Black Ops 3? If a game like The Witcher 3 doesn't need any microtransactions or supply drops, then why does Black Ops 3? Oh, that's right. Greed. And greed is going to be the one thing that destroys Activision from the inside out. Greed is a terrible thing, and this applies to anything in existence. And so, that's why I feel that Activision is the worst company in gaming currently. Yeah, EA's pretty bad too, but they've been improving steadily over the last year. Activision, not so much. Now, anything and everything that's been stated in this video can easily be applied to any company in existence currently. Also, if you have any disagreements with this video at all, then that's completely fine. You're entitled to your own opinion, and what you do with your money is your choice completely. If you support any practices talked about in this video, then that's completely understandable. Once again, what you do with your money is your choice, and you can support whatever you want. Just remember to always vote with your wallet. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, then why not leave a like, comment, subscribe, and share on social media. Any support is appreciated. Also, I've got a second channel for other content in case you're interested in checking it out. Link in the description below. Anyways, see y'all next time, but until then, peace.